Hello, and welcome to the first episode of the Unite America Movement podcast. Today's iteration of the podcast will be of the hidden issue variety, where we take a look at a political topic that doesn't get a lot of attention in the mainstream. Our guest today is going to be Zack LeMaire, who's going to be talking to us about thorium-powered nuclear energy in the state of West Virginia. Now, this policy platform not only has the potential to completely reinvigorate West Virginia's economy, but additionally has huge ramifications for U.S. energy independence and the renewable energies industry, as well as the scientific field of nuclear physics as a whole. So without further ado, Zack, why don't you tell us how are you going about pursuing this policy platform, and what brought this issue to your attention?
Well, West Virginia has been a predominantly energy-based economy state. We've led the nation in traditional energy production such as coal, oil, and natural gas. But with the current political climate evolving away from using these traditional resources, means for energy production, we're looking at more greener ways of producing electricity and energy all together, and for it to be market compatible with the traditional energy production sources. I mean, obviously, we've seen that wind and solar cannot be compatible, cannot compete with the speed and the efficiency at which traditional coal-fired plants are using. So in coal, and bituminous coal specifically, exists an element called thorium. And so what we're able to do with thorium is we are able to burn it at a much lower temperature than we would normally burn uranium for the fission to occur. It's much cleaner, right? Basically, what we were looking for is we're looking to diversify the economy of the state. We started this about 2 years ago. We were looking at that because West Virginia's dying. We just lost a congressional seat. So how can we diversify the economy, bring jobs back, and ultimately make America more energy independent than relying on foreign aid, right? So whenever we're looking at nuclear energy, traditionally uranium, it's uranium-233 or uranium-234, depending on what plant you're using. But the uranium is highly reactive, as we've seen with Chernobyl, the Fukushima disasters, and 3 Mile Island, Pennsylvania. It has the potential to create catastrophic nuclear fallout and spill radiation into the air. Thorium, it burns 98% cleaner, and it produces 98% less waste too. So with that waste, you're looking at maybe at the most 1% of that waste that is produced by the thorium is going to be ceasing to be radioactive in 100 years, where the rest is you're going to be looking at 50 to 70 years, depending on how big of the stockpile is. But it's a faster decomposing time and faster half-life than what you're looking at the traditional nuclear waste with uranium, right? You have that mountain in Nevada. I can't remember the name of it, but I'm sure people can, look it up as I said after they listen to this, or as they listen to this, and they see that mountain that they just pumped all that nuclear waste to, because it's going to be radioactive for hundreds, maybe even thousands of years to come. So what we see here in thorium is it's much cleaner, and you're going to the radioactiveness of the waste is going to be negligible, and when it compares to the uranium waste.
All right, very cool. So, Zack, why don't you tell us the specific policy proposals you have in mind to make this dream a reality in West Virginia?
So currently, as I There are some laws on the books that were made in response to the 3 Mile Island disaster um, that banned nuclear production. So, looking at nuclear power is actually forbidden in the state of West Virginia as it currently stands in the law books. There's been some fights with both the Democratic and Republican leadership on what they want to do with this. Traditionally, now we're seeing more Republicans come to the side of nuclear energy, which is a green and is a very renewable source of energy. Um, but it's kind of weird that we're seeing that the Democratic leadership in the state is kind of saying no, we don't want to go into nuclear, even though it's a green energy source and it's going to be market competitive. It's going to compete with the market. Um, we're looking to repeal those laws, which and as to how we're going to do this, whether we're going to try to push it forward through an omnibus or it's going to be a multiple bill process where we build coalitions to ease up some of these restrictions, get that stuff in. But we're looking to repeal we're looking to repeal the bans and allow nuclear energy to come into the state. Because as of right now, we can't do anything with it. We can't do anything with the thorium-rich coal that we have. If, as opposed in terms of nuclear energy, we can't do anything with it if nuclear energy is banned. So what we're looking to do is we're looking to repeal those laws so that we can allow West Virginia to move forward to be a leading energy producer in the nation once again.
All right, Zach, so I know you already kind of touched on this, but what are some of the potential ramifications of this policy going through or not going through? I know you already went over some of that, but if you could just kind of reiterate for us and touch on anything you didn't previously.
Yeah, of course, Chris. So currently, West Virginia is one of the only states that's kind of like stagnating and declining in population. We We were one of only 3 states to decline in population from the 2010 census, as we saw from the 2020 census. Um, and because of that, we lost a congressional seat. Growing up in West Virginia over the past 12 years, 12, 13 years of my life, I have seen a lot of people, a lot of young, talented people, they're moving out of the state. And so as a result of that, we're becoming a older state, and because we're the second oldest per capita, with the first being Florida, because everybody wants to go retire in Florida because it's warm. But as the average population is getting older, a lot of these companies that would bring in great jobs are moving out of the state because they're not seeing the workforce to continue being within the areas they have their plants. There are certain exceptions where there's a Toyota plant in southern West Virginia. They're looking to expand up to northern West Virginia just because cars are going to be a big thing. But overall, what we're looking at is more jobs, more high-skilled and high-paying jobs are moving out of the state. And because they're moving out of the state, what we're seeing is we're seeing more of our young and talented people who can work, who'd be able to work, who'd be able to design these things, be engineers, doctors, even just people along the assembly lines, the test drivers. That well, we're seeing them move out of the state to go to a lot of these more high profit, high opportunity areas, and that keeps us spiraling. It keeps spiraling down. What we're seeing spiraling down, just because our traditional moneymaker in the state, coal, being on its back legs, so it's on the back burner now. Coal, it still produces a good bit of the energy in the United States, but it's on its last legs with the current permits looking to expire in between 2035 and 2040. Knows they might not even last as long to their permits because there might be more restrictions. The passage of this policy or the repeal of the previous policy that we're doing it would allow an energy source that takes West Virginia's coal heritage. We'll still be mining coal. Passing this policy, we're going to see the coal that we traditionally use. We're still mining it, but we're not obviously burning it for power production. I mean, we could, but that's not the main source. We're going to be extracting the thorium and sending it to these molten salt based plants, which we can then use the thorium to make energy, and we could be producing energy and exporting energy once again. I'm already seeing in the more mountainous parts of my state, there's a lot of windmills and there's a lot of wind farms and all that stuff. That energy is not staying in West Virginia. It's being pumped down to Florida. It's being pumped down to Texas, being pumped outside. So a lot of the energy that we're currently producing within the state is going out of the state, and it's not being used within. It's not being used. I'd like to see that we use the energy within the state before we pump stuff outside. We can see we did it all throughout the 20th century. I don't see why we couldn't do that now with nuclear technology by getting out the bituminous coal, by extracting the thorium, sending the thorium off to these power plants. We could then send the coal off to steel mills. So that's coal that we use to make steel. That was used to make the Pittsburgh steel that put men on the moon. Right? So we could see as a byproduct of extracting the coal for the thorium inside of it, we could see the return of American manufacturing as well to bring jobs back into the state and also through surrounding states to kind of like revitalize the Rust Belt and sort of thing.
So, Zach, if I've understood you correctly, it seems like this policy is only opening the door for nuclear power plants to be built in West Virginia, rather than policy that actually proposes the building of such power plants. Do you have any future legislation in mind for pursuing that? What is that looking like on your end?
Currently, there already exists legislation in place. We modeled this in 2019. We created a special opportunity zone, a special economic opportunity zone in Lewis County to try to model this for the entire. It's kind of like the geographical center of the state, where if any company wants to move into the state, or any company, or like anyone wanted to start a business, we would be granting them tax moratoriums and then tax incentives to employ people in the state and bring people to the state. In COVID, we emergency authorized across all 55 counties, so it's a statewide. So it's now a statewide law, and that people can go in all the areas of West Virginia. By this push right now is just to repeal the laws, because after we allow for the possibility of nuclear energy and we state that, hey, we have a strong possibility of being a nuclear energy producer, we believe the tax incentives will speak for itself when it comes to these nuclear energy producers wanting to expand operations. They could come to West Virginia because we have the resources. Not only do we have the resources, we have the knowledgeable workforce, and we're offering some of the best business opportunities through tax incentives in the nation.
So as far as funding goes, is it just down to giving private companies that want to maybe build these plants tax incentives, or are we trying to look for federal funding or some type of tax referendum? Why don't you go into that a little bit?
As of right now, we're just looking at the tax incentives. It would take a little bit of a startup cost, which is why we have these tax incentives in place. A lot of it being, we're going to eliminate the property tax for the first 5 years, and also throughout the first 5 years, we're going to be cutting the inventory tax. We're actually looking at getting rid of the inventory tax altogether. Then we're cutting your corporate income tax in half, and then based on how many West Virginians you employ, we're going to give you a certain permanent tax credit, like percentage tax credit on that. And then if you bring new people into the state that become West Virginia residents, well, then we give you another tax incentive, which is the same amount. It's just under a different system. So then the next year, those people are West Virginians, and assuming they stay employed throughout the majority of the year, the company will then get that employed West Virginians tax incentive. So we don't foresee many subsidies going out to this new thing. Obviously, if the feds want to do something about that, they're entitled to do so, but we don't foresee state funds going to subsidize the nuclear industry.
So obviously nuclear power is very contentious with a lot of people for a lot of different reasons, and this ranges from basic skepticism to outright hostility towards this type of power source. I'd be very surprised if you guys haven't received any pushback. So what does that look like? Why don't you tell us a little bit about how you've been dealing with that?
Okay, so pushback typically comes from folks who have gray hair, who were alive for both the Chernobyl disasters and the 3 Mile Island disasters. All of us who are currently pushing for the nuclear energy were alive for Fukushima, but Fukushima being built on the coast of Japan, it was just an extraneous circumstance where there was a tsunami that hit the plant. So not like where we have drastic inclement weather situations, that throws all safety out the board, so to speak, because you can't plan for a 20-foot tsunami to hit your plant. West Virginia, we don't have that. We don't have tsunamis that are going to be coming in. We might occasionally have flooding, but it's not going to be nothing major to halt the production of these plants. One of the great things about the molten salt reactions that thorium uses, that we're trying to get to come into West Virginia, is we don't need to build the plants near the river. We can build plants in highlands because the sodium compound, as it's super chilled, using liquid nitrogen that's passing by it, and it's keeping that, it's going to keep the core temperature of the nuclear reactor down to the safe levels to keep producing the power. But if anything were to happen where we were to lose power, the power grids were to shut off, that nitrogen would stop being pumped to the system. The molten salt. The reason why it's called molten salt is because at room temperature or at ambient temperature, it becomes a liquid, and it's going to run to the runoff tanks. The fuel is also going to go into that runoff tank, and depending on the exact composition of the chilling substance, there is going to be a reaction that renders the thorium useless, so that we'll lose that fuel, but it'll cease to be radioactive. So we will avert catastrophes that way.
So I'm glad you touched on this potentially being a molten salt reactor there. As I understand it, no molten salt reactors have been built since the initial experiments with them in the 1960s. So how is that looking at getting a private company to invest in this technology, as the startup cost will be fairly significant, even in comparison to a more traditional style nuclear reactor, which already on its own has a pretty big startup cost?
The currently existing power companies in West Virginia being At Power and Mon Power, um, they have shown slight interest into divulging into nuclear, but because the laws prohibit it, they aren't really investing a lot of resources into it. But with with nuclear power on the rise, in the United States and especially overseas, we see France getting getting a supermajority of their power from nuclear energy. So if we sort of take the French approach to nuclear energy and then scale it across, scale it across West Virginia and potentially even across the United States if this does well here, which is one of the great things about our system devolution, where we can model a certain policy in one state to see how it succeeds or fails, but we can potentially see this being a great source for energy that we can then move off of the carbon, and then as the environmentalists like to say, we could reach net zero by 2050, right? So, there are some drawbacks with there's not a lot of groundwork being laid in this area since we tried it out in the 60s, but whenever we did try it out in the 60s, it was a lot safer than the traditional heavy water reactors, even when we're using uranium. And since thorium is a lot safer, even when we're using heavy water, molten salt is going to make that reaction a whole lot more safer than your traditional heavy water uranium nuclear plants. It will take a little bit of a startup cost. I don't foresee the legislature subsidizing that, and as of right now, just because of our lack of funding and because states aren't allowed to go into debt, so that hinders us from giving resources to these companies that are moving in. But overall, I do foresee it's going to be high risk, but I do foresee it being a high reward situation. So the rewards will heavily outweigh the startup risks, in my view.
All right, very concise there. So is there any contentions you have with the policy? For instance, is there anything you think should be improved? Any changes you think should be made? What changes, if there are any, do you want to make? Just fill us in on that there.
I mean, I'm totally on board. I'm one of the chief proponents for repealing this nuclear policy across the state, and I'm a big believer in the free market, and I believe the free market has can best produce the outcomes that we need. So we just take the government out of the picture of the regulations, and with the market do what it does best, and we let private entities do what they do best and create great solutions to the problem that we're facing here with in terms of producing and starting up the nuclear facilities, producing the facilities, and ultimately bringing jobs back to the state. So, as as we take the government off, I say the free of the markets, the free of the people, because people get the private entities create jobs, and people get those jobs, and they get money, and they're able to be more financially and economically sound, independent, and be able to do things they would enjoy rather than living paycheck to paycheck, just worrying about if they're going to have enough money for gas or if they're going to have enough money to pay their phone, the electricity and all those bills that come with owning a home, or even just renting an apartment.
All right, so this policy absolutely has some potential to completely economically transform West Virginia. Are you worried at all about other states jumping in to try to outcompete you or anything like that? Or maybe that's something you would encourage as far as competition goes?
Obviously, with me focusing on state level, I'm trying to see West Virginia be brought out of the depths of poverty that it's been put into with the moving away from coal. I mean, even when we were heavily relying on coal for power and the industrial might, we did see a lot of poverty in the state just because these coal barons, these coal executives didn't really care about the people that were mining coal. I'd like to see, I personally would like to see this benefit West Virginia, bring us up, but whatever helps us create better energy and cleaner energy, I would support. I would think that other states might want to, especially um, our neighbor Pennsylvania, where the 3 Mile Island disaster happened, to kind of, I would foresee them, watch and see how it develops here. Even a lot of the other coal-rich states, see how this um, policy and the power production through nuclear energy developed here in West Virginia a little bit before they tried dipping their feet. Because if we're able to do a lot of the groundwork and we're able to produce efficient results, we could then easily scale the um, production across into other states and even across the nation as a whole, because we have already developed the technology to be able to um, make nuclear energy compatible with fossil fuel productions, but it would give the other states and these other companies a platform to build off of to create new innovations.
All right, very well said. So we're coming up on the end here. I know you have to get going. Typically, how we do these is we have the introduction of the guest at the end. That way, no one's kind of prejudging them while they're talking about the topic. So if you want to just tell us about who you are, Zach, your political beliefs, and anything else you want to plug.
Okay, so I'm Zack LeMaire. I'm a Republican candidate for the House of Delegates in West Virginia. Um, this uh, this pro-nuclear stance that I've been explaining throughout the entire podcast is actually the chief um, policy plank on my platform for running for the House here this year to be elected on November the 8th. I'm a classical liberal. I believe in the believe that I model my beliefs to people, great statesmen like Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, even George Washington to an extent, but more so to Jefferson and Madison. I believe that the government, while it does exist to protect the people, um, when it tries to protect the people, it doesn't always go well. So limited government is the best government. It's the best kind of government. Obviously, if we could limit government to where we don't have government, that'd be ideal. But as James Madison said in Federalist 51, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. And if angels were to govern men, we wouldn't have to have all these controls on government. So we're not angels, and angels aren't governing us. So we gotta find a balance to control the government to make it small, a list of small enumerated powers, and leave the rest to your more localized governments, and then whatever powers aren't enumerated, and those constitutions or charters give those powers to the people and the private entities, private enterprise, to be able to create these meaningful and effective solutions, not only for our communities, but for our states and our nations, maybe even the world. But here I'm it's a tough race, but we're optimistic, and I'm proud to be the first, and actually, I'm proud to be the first and the youngest candidate to openly support um, advancing nuclear energy here in the state. I was the first to say it back in the beginning of the race in February. We've seen some other more prominent figures tag along to the idea just because the political climate is supportive of putting nuclear energy inside of the state, not only the climate within the state, but pushes from outside the state that we should try to invest in this potential economic powerhouse, so to speak. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, at LeMaire, LEMAIRE, the number 4, and Liberty. Those are my personal platforms, and then all of my campaign platforms are the same handle across Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We have LeMaire 4WV. So you can go out there. Then my website is LeMaireForLiberty.com. You can go and you can see a little bit why I'm running. You can view my platform and see the issues. Even donate if you feel so inclined. We're looking at starting up a newsletter coming into the home stretch. Now we're out doing more events, and we're getting out to people's doors more. We want to share our success with the people that support it.
Yeah, Zach, we really appreciate you coming on. This topic has been great and has the potential to really change West Virginia's economic situation, but also just advance science and the renewable energies industry as well. So yeah, we want to thank you again. We really appreciate you coming on to talk to us for our first episode. Hope you have a great day and good luck with the campaign.
It's been a blast. Thank you for the opportunity, Christian. I really appreciate it.
All right, so thank you for tuning in to the first episode of the United American Movement podcast. We'll have Zach's campaign info linked in the description if you're interested. And if you have a hidden issue that you think we should discuss or would like to come on to discuss yourself, you can reach us at any of our social media DMs or on our website. Thanks again for tuning in. We hope to see you next time.